everybody. Welcome back. Week 8 is on the horizon. Can't come soon enough. Thank you guys for tuning in at the BA Sports Podcast. We're here to answer all of you guys' questions for the starts, sits, sleepers, busts, whether you're streaming defenses, streaming kickers. We've got it all here. Keep it locked in. You know we've got Brady on deck. Brady, how you going? How you doing?
I'm good. We just watched the Rams absolutely get gifted a win. I know they performed really well, best they have all season, but that was a clear face mask by the Rams, and the defender was even holding his head about it. So, shocker there, but it was a tough loss for Minnesota. I didn't think they would pull that out at the end, anyways. I felt they would still struggle to move the ball, but it's week 8. We just had Thursday night football, 30-20 Rams over Vikings. We're gonna go into our top start, sits, sleepers, and busts. Tanner, let's start it out with the quarterback position. Who do you have as a quarterback start this week for the listeners?
I'm going to go with Joe Burrow. I mean, I know the matchup doesn't look great statistically, but look at who the Eagles have played: Deshaun Watson, Daniel Jones, Derek Carr. Joe Burrow's been hot the last couple of weeks. 17 plus points in 4 out of 6 of his last games. Play Joe Burrow with confidence this week.
Yeah, I like Joe Burrow a lot. I think that game's going to be very high scoring. I actually am going to get into that game on the wide receiver portion. Start for me actually is going to be CJ Stroud bounce back week. The Colts allow the 10th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. He's back at home against the divisional opponent. I think he wants to get back on track. And whenever he plays the Colts, he usually is on track. He has a 70.5% completion percentage, averages 294 yards passing per game, and 2 touchdowns in each of the 3 games he's played versus Indianapolis. No Nico Collins, but he still got Tank Dell, Dalton Schultz, Joe Mixon. I think he's got a plethora of weapons, and he's going to shine here after having a disappointing outing last week at Green Bay. I think they get back on track here, the Houston Texans. Tanner, do you have any other starts for the quarterback position or players that the listener should just take a look at?
Uh, I'm on the edge of calling him a start or calling him a sleeper, but I'll just go ahead and say it. Bo Nix. Call me crazy, but he's averaging more points than Mahomes this year. He has a really good matchup versus the Panthers. They gave up almost 20 fantasy points to Marcus Mariota, who's a backup, and 16 plus to 4 quarterbacks this year, including 3 who have gone over 19 fantasy points.
Yeah. 19 plus PPR points for Bo Nix in the last 3 out of 5 games for him. Also, something I like about Bo Nix is he can get it done on the ground with his legs. I like him over Mahomes this week. Like you said, Tanner, he's outperformed Mahomes. Mahomes hasn't thrown a touchdown in October, and I believe that's the case. I think I saw that stat. I don't know if it's actually true because that's shocking to me if Mahomes has not thrown a touchdown pass in the month of October. But this matchup is great for Bo Nix. He's the Panthers have allowed the 4th most fantasy points to quarterbacks, so I think fire him up. Another guy I like is Caleb Williams, and I'll go into him a little more when I talk about the wide receivers and one of his weapons. But Caleb Williams also a great start I think this week. I also do like Jared Goff, even though Tennessee has been tough against quarterbacks. If they're without L'Jarius Sneed again, who missed in the Bills game, I think Goff can be a top 10 quarterback this week who can really help your fantasy team. And then Kirk Cousins, another start who has been a start the last 2 weeks and honestly not done well. Hopefully, he can get back on track here, though. Tampa Bay is banged up on the defensive side of the ball. They just lost Jamel Dean. Their top corner was placed on IR. So we'll see what those guys can do. Let's move on to the sits, though. Sit at the quarterback position. Tanner, who do you have as a sit this week?
Yeah, none other than Dak Prescott. Fewer than 17 fantasy points in all but one game this year. And the one that he had more than that, it was against the Ravens, where I think he threw 51 times. Now he gets the Niners, whose offense is banged up, but their defense isn't. They've allowed an average of fewer than 15 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. Sit Dak Prescott.
Yeah, I hate to say it. I think he could do well after the bye, but we have yet to see. The Niners defense is tough against quarterbacks, and Cowboys offense just hasn't looked great all year. I hope he bounces back this week for all the Cowboys fans' sake and myself. A sit I have actually is Trevor Lawrence of the Jaguars. The Packers last week shut down CJ Stroud. I think Trevor Lawrence is going to struggle this week against this Packers defense, who's been pretty good against the quarterback position in the last couple of weeks. And Trevor Lawrence is only averaging about 14 fantasy points per game on the season. That's not great. I know the last 3 weeks have looked better, but as the season as a whole, it just hasn't looked great for Trevor Lawrence. So I would keep him on the bench this week unless you're desperate in a 2 QB or super flex league. And let's move into, we talked about the sleeper. Tanner, do you have any other sleepers? My sleeper was Bo Nix, who we already talked about. Do you have any other sleepers at the quarterback position?
On sit, just to add on to Trevor Lawrence, I mean he gets the Packers. They face Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, Anthony Richardson, C.J. Stroud, and they've only allowed one quarterback to beat them for over 16.4 fantasy points this year. I know Lawrence's numbers have been better lately, 17 plus in 2 of his 3 last games, but like you said, he's averaging under 15 fantasy points per game. Going into sleepers, though, I think Tua has a really good matchup. I typically like him at home. Him and Jared Goff, 2 quarterbacks that play really well at home. He gets the Cardinals on Sunday. And then Russell Wilson against the Giants on Monday night. I think he's a sleeper as well.
Yeah, Russell Wilson looked great in his debut against the Jets. The Giants allow over 20 fantasy points per game against quarterbacks, so I think that's a good matchup for Russell Wilson. Now, let's go into the sits. And honestly, this guy is a sit just because I don't know if he can keep like he's just been bad this year. It's Mahomes. I mean, he has a great matchup against Vegas. They got DeAndre Hopkins, but like he just doesn't throw a lot of touchdowns. And this is his first time he's failed to throw a touchdown in consecutive games in the last 2 games since a long time. Actually, I can't remember the last time that has happened, and he has more interceptions than actual touchdowns. So that's surprising for Mahomes, like the best quarterback in the league. They're still getting a win because their defense is so good and they can run the ball. Kareem Hunt has looked very good. He scored, I believe, 2 touchdowns last week. Tanner, who do you have as a sit this week?
Yeah, on Mahomes, he's just not a good fantasy quarterback.
Yeah.
I mean, Drake May in 2 starts this year has thrown just 1 less touchdown pass than Patrick Mahomes on the year. But he does have a good matchup this week, like you were saying. Raiders have allowed 3 quarterbacks to score 23 plus points this year. Those 3 quarterbacks, if you're wondering, Bo Nix, Andy Dalton, and Justin Fields. But going into the Situms, I mean, I hyped up Drake May last week. I don't really love his matchup this week against the
Yeah.
Jets.
I
He's
would
been
love
really
it.
good. He's been really good
Mhm.
this year. He has a combined 40.4 fantasy points. He was definitely a hot ad on the waiver wire this week. I'm sure of it. But he gets the Jets, and their defense has allowed the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks this season.
Mhm.
He's definitely worth a look in super flex leagues, but I'd sit him in 1 QB.
Yeah, something I want to point out about this matchup, because people may look at it as the Jets defense hasn't looked great the last 2 weeks because Russell Wilson and Josh Allen just lit them up both for 28 plus fantasy points in 2 straight games. But they look to get DJ Reed back, who was out last game, one of their top corners. They could be without 2 of their safeties, though, which is concerning. But I think Drake May is a sit still. They also are getting Hassan Reddick back for the first time all year, but I would rather start Bo Nix. I could see May getting to a sleeper level quarterback just because of garbage time, just because they're trailing and he's throwing the ball a lot. But I don't think that's a reason to start him, and I would keep him on the bench unless you're saying, or unless you're playing in, like Tanner was saying, super flex league, then you can start him as your second QB, which I wouldn't fault you for,
Yep.
because I did that last week and he paid off big time.
I've got two more, if that's all right.
Yeah, go for it.
Just when we were talking about Mahomes, I thought of another highly drafted quarterback, Anthony Richardson, because I know I had a problem in a league where he went off against the Texans in Week 1. It was his only good game of the season, so you might be contemplating starting him this week when he gets the Texans again. But I mean, you can't start him with any confidence. I think, like, at best, he's a risk reward low end starter. I'd sit Anthony Richardson if you can. And then I wanted to talk about Geno Smith. He's having a strong season, 17.3 points per game. I think he still leads the league in passing yards, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he does.
But the Bills have only allowed one quarterback to beat them for over 17.8 points, and only two have had more than 15.9. So I kind of feel the same way about Geno Smith, where in traditional one quarterback leagues, I think you can sit him.
Yeah, I almost put him as my sit of the week instead of Trevor Lawrence. Tough matchup for him. Let's move on to the running backs, though. And the running back start I have this week is, as my top start, is Jordan Mason. Cowboys allow the fourth most points to running backs, and 4 running backs have gone for 18 plus PPR points against this Cowboys defense. This may be the last game for Jordan Mason as the true workhorse starting running back, because after this week, the Niners are on bye, and then after the bye, they're expecting Christian McCaffrey back. So, in a great matchup for Jordan Mason, why not just ball out and try and convince the Niners staff that you deserve touches even when McCaffrey comes back? Because this is essentially his last time to show them what he's got before they bring back the big guns in McCaffrey. But I'm sure they'll still give Jordan Mason touches afterwards. He's looked great this year. He's done really well. He's gotten banged up a little bit, but I think he gets back on track here. The Cowboys defense is banged up in general. They probably will get Micah Parsons back. They won't have DeMarcus Lawrence, though. I think the Cowboys run defense is just in shambles, so fire him up this week. Tanner, who do you have as a start at the running back position this week?
Yeah, I've got 2. DeAndre Swift, 20 plus points in 3 straight games before the bye. Really good matchup against the Commanders, giving up 5.2 yards per carry. 5 running backs have beat the Commanders for 14 plus fantasy points. 3 of them have gone for over 18 and 2 over 20. I think the game script's going to be really good for Swift. Start him, definitely. Lastly is going to be Javonte Williams. Coming off his best game of the year, he had a couple of touchdowns and 26 points. Could be a really positive game script against Carolina. He's scored 16 plus in 2 of his last 3 games. Think about this. We're only in week 8. The Panthers have allowed 7 running backs to beat them for more than 17 points. So start Javonte Williams.
Yeah, I think Javonte has a great matchup here. So no doubt about it. Fire him up this week. And I almost put him as one of my starts. And a sit at the running back position, Tanner, I think both of us can agree on this one, is Tony Pollard, because Detroit's run defense is one of the best in the league. They've allowed the 3rd fewest fantasy points on the ground. With Levis and or Rudolph at quarterback, I don't think that the Lions have to worry much about the Tennessee pass game, especially with DeAndre Hopkins going to Kansas City. Calvin Ridley is only the really true threat that the Titans have at the receiver position. So I expect the Lions to load the box, try and stop the run. I don't know if Tajay Spears is going to be back this week. That's going to be a situation to monitor. But if he is back, he's been the guy that when they're trailing, he gets more snaps. He's more involved in the passing game. So if the Lions get a lead like I expect them to do and Tajay Spears is active, I think they could lean more on Tajay Spears and try and get him involved. I know he's banged up, so I'm not sure if he's going to go this week, but that is something to monitor. Tanner, what do you have to say about Tony Pollard? I know you agree with me on that sick call.
Yeah, you hit it right. I mean, you pretty much said everything I was gonna say. I know he's averaging 14.1 points per game, so he might be kind of hard to script, but kind of hard to sit. But I really think game script's going to be a problem here. Like you said, regardless of who starts at quarterback for the Titans,
it's a bad
they like
situation.
Spears didn't play last week, so you thought maybe Pollard was gonna have a good game. He gets game scripted out. If that happens again this week, Spears is going to be back. He's going to be their guy. He's the guy they like to throw to. They're going to be trailing in the game, so yeah, sit Tony Pollard and sit Nick Chubb. He had a touchdown last week, but 22 yards on 10 carries is not good. I know the Ravens gave it up to Rachaad White last week, but that was as a receiver, and Nick Chubb's not going to do that. He's a risk-reward flex starter at best.
Yeah. Ravens defense is quite the tough matchup. Another running back I'm not too big of a fan of this week. I know the Jets have been bad against the run, but I think having Hassan Reddick come back, I think Ramondre Stevenson's going to struggle on the ground. He didn't look great last week, but the Jets did struggle to stop the run. I just think that this game doesn't favor Ramondre Stevenson. It's a tough matchup for him. I'd rather leave him out. He also hasn't been logging that many snaps. I mean, it's been like 60% snaps or less over the past 3 weeks for Ramondre Stevenson. So that's something to caution over. Let's move into the sleepers at the running back position. One of my sleepers is Chase Brown. 4 running backs have 12 plus PPR points versus Philly in a game that I think is going to be a shootout. Why not fire up Chase Brown as a low end RB2 high end flex play? I really like him as a flex play opposed to an RB2 play. I'm playing him as a flex play this week. He had 14 plus PPR points in 3 straight games before he had a dud last week with like 7.5 or something like that. I think he gets back on track against Philly. I think he's going to catch the ball out of the backfield. I think he gets into the end zone. He usually scores over the past 3 weeks before last week. He scored a lot of touchdowns, and I think he's the guy that they're going to try and go to in the goal line situations. I know it had been Zach Moss, but I really like Chase Brown this week. Tanner, what about you for the sleepers at the running back position?
Yeah, Kareem Hunt. I mean, I remember on waivers, is it going to be Carson Steele? Is it going to be Kareem Hunt? Is it going to be Clyde Edwards-Helaire? No, it's clearly Kareem Hunt. I mean, he's been incredible. He's averaged 17.2 fantasy points in his first 3 games. He's seen over 40% of the team's backfield touches in that time. Really good matchup against the Raiders. Their defense has allowed 15 points to 7 running backs this season, including 3 who have finished with more than 20 points. I really like Kareem Hunt as long as they keep feeding him the way they have until Pacheco returns. A couple other guys worth mentioning: James Cook against Seattle, J.K. Dobbins against the Saints, and Josh Jacobs against the Jaguars.
Yep, and let's move into some busts at the running back position. One of the guys I have is Chuba Hubbard. No Andy Dalton in this one. Bryce Young's taking over the quarterback duties. And if we remember what Chuba Hubbard did in the games with Bryce Young, it wasn't that great. It's going to be tough to trust him against this Broncos defense, who have been very, very good against running backs, quarterbacks. And they just held Alvin Kamara to 24 total yards and only 8 PPR points. I'd caution against starting Hubbard as an RB1, RB2. He's more of a flex option, but that's like a desperate flex option. I would avoid him this week. Tanner, who do you have as a bust at the running back position? Tanner dropped off again, guys. I don't know what happened, but I'm gonna have to keep going from here. And again, technical difficulties on Tanner's end. I'm not sure. Maybe he can rejoin the room. Let's move into. Oh, there he is. Tanner, you back?
All right, we're back. Yeah, I was
Hell
gonna
yeah,
say
let's go.
Zach Moss. I'm not sure if people are still rostering him or not. But he scored fewer than 9 fantasy points in each of his last 3 games. He's completely lost the job to Chase Brown, like you said. That was a great call on a start / sleeper. He's Zach Moss has seen only 16 touches in each of the last 2 games. He gets an Eagles defense that's allowed just 1 rushing touchdown this season and 19 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. A couple other guys worth mentioning. Tyler Goodson, not going to do anything. Jonathan Taylor looks like he'll be back. Devin Singletary, they've been getting out snapped and out touched by Tyron Tracy Jr. and Travis Etienne. I mean, he's been terrible all year long. Tank Bigsby figures to be more involved. If not, I think they'll give the ball to Dearness Johnson. So watch out for those guys in your lineups.
Yeah, those are some good call outs. I think even if you want to think about Tyron Tracy, he's got a tough matchup. So I think honestly, try and sit all the Giants running backs because at Pittsburgh, that defense is a tough one, and it's in prime time as well. So it's going to be tough for either running back to get it going. Let's move on to the wide receiver position. And some starts at the wide receiver position. I got 2 of them, and then I'll let Tanner go into some of his. T. Higgins and Darnell Mooney. T. Higgins, I project this game to be a shootout. Tanner has Joe Burrow as a start. I have T. Higgins as a start. T. Higgins excels versus man coverage. He's a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy points per route run when facing man coverage. And he's second in targets on the Bengals with 45 targets in only 5 games played. To put that in perspective, Jamar Chase has played all 7 games and only has 3 more targets than T. Higgins. T. Higgins has been out targeting Jamar Chase over the last couple of weeks. So fire up T. Higgins this week. Darnell Mooney, Tampa lost Jamel Dean, as I mentioned earlier, and Mooney loves zone coverage, which the Bucs run at a top 5 rate this year. And he had his best game of the year against the Bucs earlier this month. 9 catches, 105 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Fire up Darnell Mooney with confidence. I think the Falcons get back on track this week after a dud last week against the Seahawks. Tanner, who do you have as a start at the wide receiver position?
Yeah, it's going to be George Pickens. He had a great game against the Jets. He gets the other New York team this week, the Giants. They've given up the 6th most fantasy points to perimeter receivers. Him and Russ seem to have a connection. You know, Russ will actually throw the ball downfield and make Pickens go up and win those contested catches. I think that's a positive. And Pickens is a wide receiver too this week. 31% of Russ's throws were into tight windows. So he's willing to throw it into coverage and let Pickens, who's a great contested catch wide receiver, make a play. For reference, Justin Fields' max percentage of tight window throws this season was just 16.5 in a game. I also want to mention Jayden Reed. He had a bad game last week. I mean, it seems like everyone in this Packers offense is just boom or bust. The ball's getting distributed around everywhere. I mean, especially when you look beyond Jayden Reed at the Romeo Doubs, Ontavian Wicks, Christian Watson, it just seems impossible to guess which of those 3 guys is going to go off next to Jayden Reed. But Jayden Reed gets the Jags this week. They've given up the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers, and 9 have scored more than 14 against them, including 4 who have done most of their damage out of the slot. Reed is a slot receiver. Fire his ass up.
Yeah. Jayden Reed, I think he gets back on track this week. Jordan Love is going to have a good week as well. As you mentioned, all those weapons for him, Tanner. Another wide receiver I like is DJ Moore. Washington runs a lot of cover 1 and cover 2, and DJ Moore thrives versus both of those coverages. Washington has also allowed 10 touchdowns to wide receivers on the year, and 7 wide receivers have 15 plus PPR points against this defense. Not to mention, this is a little homecoming game for DJ Moore to the DMV area. Buy low before this weekend because I think he's going to have a big game. Tanner, you have any other starts at the wide receiver position?
Yeah, it's Jalen Waddle. I know we were seeing what Tyreek Hill said to the media earlier this week, right? But that means Jalen Waddle is too. His numbers have just been terrible without Tua, but that hasn't the whole offense. I mean, he's failed to score double digits in 5 straight games. If Tua plays, which we all expect him to, fire up Jalen Waddle. He's got a great matchup against the Cardinals, who have allowed the 8th most points per game to opposing wideouts this season. And then, I'll save the rest for sleepers.
Yeah, I've had Jalen Waddle on the sit list for like every week that Tua has been inactive on IR. So it feels great actually wanting to start him this week and having confidence in the quarterback that's playing. Also, to mention, they lost their 2 other quarterbacks, Skylar Thompson and Tyler Huntley. They actually just signed CJ Beathard to back up Tua. So I even trust him more than the other 2 quarterbacks that throw on the ball. But wide receiver wise, for the sits, I have Christian Kirk as a sit because Evan Ingram has come back with a vengeance and taken targets away from Christian Kirk. Only 9 targets in the last 2 games. The Packers corners have been great the last 2 weeks, shutting down the Texans. Tank Dell didn't do anything. Granted, he did drop a touchdown, but it's going to be tough for Christian Kirk against this Packers defense, which it ties into the whole Trevor Lawrence sit. Another sit I have is Deontay Johnson, who did not fare well with Bryce Young at quarterback. Bryce Young's back at quarterback. Yikes. The Broncos are number 2 in the least fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Also, they could be getting Pat Surtain back this week. He's usually the corner that shuts down wide receiver ones. Do I need to mention the victims of Pat Surtain Island again? But he's been their lockdown corner, defensive player of the year type of corner. I think that Deontay Johnson struggles if he's back for sure, but even if he's not back, I still think he has a tough time. Bryce Young's quarterback. Tanner, who do you have as a sit at the wide receiver position?
Yeah, I had Deontay as well. I'm not going to talk about him too much, but I even had him before Bryce Young was announced the starter. I mean, that makes it even worse. Just dealing with multiple injuries. Broncos have only allowed 1 touchdown to wide receivers this year, and the 3rd fewest fantasy points to perimeter wide receivers. We've seen what that offense looks like with Bryce Young. I don't need to say much more. But I wanted to talk about Maserati Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm pretty fucking pissed off about Marvin Harrison Jr. this year.
Alert.
This is not a rage, sit him. I did try to trade him in a couple of leagues. Miami's defense has only allowed 1 touchdown and the 4th fewest fantasy points to perimeter receivers. And he gets Jalen Ramsey. I mean, this has a lot in common with the Deontay Johnson sit.
Lockdown.
But it's been weird with Maserati Marv. Like, his catchable ball rate is really low, but his target share is good. His air yard share is good. His ADOT, which is at around 13.5 yards, is good. I mean, there's a bunch of different things where it's like, this is what we like. And oftentimes, like, we would look at those peripheral stats and say, keep it going. It's bound to hit. But who fucking knows? And when it's going to hit, and why can't Kyler get him the damn ball? I mean, it would help.
He was wide open last week. Did you see that?
I saw it, but I don't know. People said Kyler was already scrambling for his life back there, so I need to see like the whole play on that. But yeah,
I need the all 22 pulled up.
I mean, it would help if they had him running slants or screens. I mean, he hasn't caught a ball off a screen this year. Like, are GL not trust to get him the ball behind the line of scrimmage? It's ridiculous. In college, I mean, look at some of the receivers over the last couple of years. Malik Neighbors, Drake London, and Maserati Marv are three of the most doubled wide receivers in college football history, or at least since they started tracking these type of stats. And Kyler can't seem to get him the ball. It's ridiculous. Like,
He can't see over the offensive line, bro.
well, he wasn't having a problem chucking it up to fucking the Human Torch, Greg Dortch. Like, God. So, yeah, sit Marvin Harrison. And that's all I have to say.
I've got more about this because it just doesn't get better. He's better versus man coverage, but the Dolphins play majority zone coverage. 2/3 of the time, they're playing zone coverage versus man. And he ranks top 10 among wide receivers in fantasy points per route run against man coverage. But the Dolphins don't run man coverage, so it's going to be tough for him to get it going against this defense. He just hasn't looked himself the past couple weeks, I think. And as you said, this is just a bad matchup with Jalen Ramsey. And in 5 out of the 6 games, Jalen Ramsey's traveled with the number 1 wide receiver and taken the majority of the snaps against them. So he's one of the corners that will travel with your best and lock down your best. But it's going to be a tough matchup. They're number 1 against fantasy points allowed to quarterback, so tough matchup for Kyler in general. I think the Dolphins want to get right in this one with Tua coming back and everything. So I think this is I'm lean towards the Dolphins in this one, but that is a sit at the wide receiver position or bust, whichever one you want to classify it as. We just don't think he's going to have a good game. And let's move into some sleepers. Tanner, who do you have as a sleeper at the wide receiver position?
Sorry, I'm still calming down from Maserati Marv, that fucking guy.
For him.
I'm not sure his health. What do we know about Jauan Jennings? Is he going to play on Sunday?
Last I saw, he was leaning towards being out versus the Cowboys. If he was in, I'd say start him for sure.
Yeah,
but that's just something to monitor. I think they do have the Sunday night game, so there's a little more time for him to get healthy. But I mean, it's really just half a day extra.
Yeah, keep tabs on his status this week. But if he's able to play against the Cowboys, again, the Niners lost Ayuk. Debo's just got out of the hospital with pneumonia. I mean, the one time this year
Cowboys
Jennings was in
a
bum. Oh, Cowboys defense is just like the rest of their team, ass. They've given up the 7th most points per game to perimeter receivers. We saw Jauan Jennings in that whatever week it was when he had over a 40 burger.
40 burger.
That was his first opportunity this year in a position like this, so he'll definitely do that shit against the Cowboys. But
yeah, and then have a backup plan just in case if you're between him and someone else, make sure it's him and someone in the Sunday night or Monday night game.
That's good. Yeah, you got to have insurance, most definitely.
100%.
And then Devontae Smith, really like the matchup. And just because I'm high on Bo Nix this week, I'm going to say Courtland Sutton. He should be pissed off.
I think he gets back on track too. I mean,
right. The box score said 0 targets last week. Technically, he had 1, but he got called back to defensive holding. But still a goose egg in the stat sheet for fantasy, nonetheless.
Yeah, I think he's good as a wide receiver 3 flex play this week. I wouldn't try and put him as a wide receiver 2, but I mean, if you're thin, I'm sorry, but yeah, I would fire him up. Another guy I do like as a sleeper is Jalen McMillan. No Godwin or Mike Evans this week, and I expect the Bucs to be trailing the majority of this game. Last week, he saw 8 targets. Atlanta has allowed the 9th most fantasy points to wide receivers. I think Jalen McMillan is pretty good flex play this week, and also I think he's good value in daily fantasy for players that play daily fantasy as well. I think he's very good value. Another sleeper I want to throw out there because people may be pissed off about him last week, Tanner, is Tank Dell. Dropped the touchdown last week, got locked up. The Texans passing defense in general was down, as I talked about with CJ Stroud earlier. But I am not faulting Dell fully for that bad game. I mean, it was mostly just the whole team, the whole offense, besides Joe Mixon, who went off last week for the Texans. But last year at home versus Indianapolis, Tank Dell had 7 catches for 72 yards and a touchdown. There's no Nico Collins. He's going to be the top wide receiver besides Stephon Diggs. It's him, Diggs, and Schultz. So I think he gets on track here, and I think he gets in the end zone and scores a touchdown this week at home and gets the Houston crowd going. Tanner, who do you have? Anyone else at the sleeper wide receiver position?
No, sir.
All right. Well, any busts? Because one of my busts was Marvin Harrison. I've got one more. Do you have any busts at the wide receiver position?
Yeah, I think Chris Olave at the Chargers.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Wan'Dale Robinson at the Steelers.
Yeah, Daniel Jones is going to have a rough time in that outing.
And then any Colts wide receiver, as long as Joe Flacco is not starting, can't trust him with Anthony Richardson at the helm.
Yeah.
Is glaringly obvious against Miami.
There's just too many of them that you can't really choose one.
Exactly. Christian Kirk, I think, is worth a mention. If you're starting him, he's been hard to trust this year. He's failed to score over 7 points in his last 2 games.
Mm-hmm.
And then probably Calvin Ridley. I don't want people to get too excited about that hop. Yeah, their pass attacks a shit show, and Ridley's just Ridley's so ineffective. He needs to quit doing post-game press conferences for once. And the funny thing is, during that, the whole time he's saying shit, and then he's looking around the locker room to see if any of his teammates are listening over there, and then he puts his hand over his mouth and kind of looks away like, Ridley, get the hell out of here. He's 4th from last in the league among all offensive players in receiving EPA. Like, that's at a miserable negative 11.9 points. He's just he could even get out of the league, and I don't think anyone would notice.
He shouldn't be on your team, maybe. Honestly, I'm not even lying. He probably shouldn't be on your team the way this offense has looked over the past couple weeks. It's bad.
It's bad.
I've got one, and it's Scary Terry. If there's no Jaden Daniels, I especially am afraid of starting Scary Terry. The Bears defense is no joke. They're number 7 in the least fantasy points allowed against wide receivers. If Marcus Mariota is at quarterback against this Bears defense, I don't think you can trust him. And if Jaden Daniels goes, I would play Terry McLaurin as a flex. But other than that, if he's not going, I am avoiding Scary Terry because he's had a great last 3 or 4 weeks. But with Marcus Mariota against this Bears defense, I think it could be a struggle for Terry McLaurin. And that's going to do it for the wide receivers. Let's move into the tight ends really quick. Start, sit, sleepers, and bust at the tight end position. Start at the tight end position for me. I know you had Dak as a sit, but it's hard to sit this guy. Jake Ferguson, he's the number 2 target on the Cowboys offense. Hard to get away from him this week. I think he's going to get fed along with CeeDee Lamb. I think they're going to be trailing. I think they're going to be throwing. I think you got to start Jake Ferguson in a fantasy landscape, where it's just a bad tight end situation overall. There could be some better options out there for you. If like Njoku or Evan Ingram are out there, I'd start them over Jake Ferguson. But if they're not out there, I think you just got to fire up Jake Ferguson and forget about it and hope he gets you double-digit fantasy points. Tanner, who do you have as a start at the tight end position?
Yeah, you just said his name. It's David Njoku. Battled injuries earlier in the year, but he's back now. He's a virtual must start like every week. I mean, last week, 10 catches, 14 targets, 76 yards and a touchdown, 23 fantasy points. Why didn't we like him going into the draft? Because those were his numbers with Deshaun Watson. Well, Deshaun Watson's not there anymore. And now Amari Cooper's not there either. And I think David Njoku's the number 1 option in the offense. At least the most reliable. It's not Jerry Jeudy. It's not Cedric Tillman, even though I kind of like him.
Yeah.
It's Njoku. The Ravens defense allowed 5 tight ends to beat them for at least 9.7 points, including 3 going over 15. Hey, dude, we'll take 9.7 points from tight ends. I mean, Cade Otton had a nice game last week. So Njoku's a really good play. Fire his ass up this Sunday.
Yeah, he's easily the number one target. I mean, 10 catches, 76 yards, and a touchdown on 14 targets. Jameis, feed the man, please. We all want to see it. And sit at the tight end position in the same game. Tight end Isaiah Likely, who hasn't seen over 4 targets in the 6 straight games. It's been the Mark Andrews show in the last 2 games. He's been outperforming Isaiah Likely. He's gotten into the end zone. Is this what everyone has been waiting for? I think so. If you drafted Mark Andrews, I think this is great. He's gotten back on track. If you dropped Mark Andrews, I'm sorry for you. But you should have probably just held on to him. I know Tanner got him off the waivers, I believe, in one league. So I think Isaiah Likely is going to struggle once again. I don't see the Ravens passing the ball a lot in this game. They may be without Zay Flowers, though, so they could use Isaiah Likely a little more if that's the case. But I still am not a huge fan of Isaiah Likely. Tanner, who do you have as a sit at the tight end position?
Yeah, Mark Andrews faithful. We have arrived. Isaiah Likely lovers, get the hell out of here. I've got Tucker Kraft. Hey, Kraft cheese. He gets drafted to the Packers. Come on now. Didn't have a lot of targets last week. Found the end zone in a bad matchup. He catches a couple more touchdowns. He's probably going to get a commercial deal or something. But this is a good matchup against the Jags. They've allowed 4 different tight ends to beat them for over 11 points, including Cole Kmet and Hunter Henry, who had at least 17 against them.
Yeah, Hunter Henry went off last week.
So I like Tucker Kraft, and Love's obviously looking for him in the red zone.
Yeah, that's gonna be a game where I think the Packers destroy them. Like it's not even gonna be close. But speaking of Hunter Henry, he's actually my sleeper tight end of the week. And both starts with Drake May. He scored 13 plus PPR points with the tight end position as it is, as we mentioned. I mean, that's 13 points. That's awesome. Like, we'll take that any given week. The Jets are a tough defense, but in a game script that favors the passing game, once again, I think May will look his way more often than not. He's the old reliable guy for Drake May when he gets in trouble. I mean, as we saw, I don't know who was up watching the London game last week, but Hunter Henry Moss game.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, holy cow.
Oh, yeah.
Dare we say?
Oh, my goodness
gracious. That was a hell of a catch by
and a hell of a throw.
Henry.
A hell of a throw. Yeah. It takes confidence to put that in there. Not a lot of quarterbacks are making that throw.
Drake Mays look really good, really, really good. So I think he goes to him. And we've seen him make contested catches. So I think if they're in a trailing game script and garbage time is a factor, I think that could help boost his stat line, which fine by me. But Tanner, you have any sleepers at the tight end position?
Yeah, dare I say Kyle Pitts? I mean,
oh my God.
He's been solid over the last 3, 10 or more in each game during that time. He's seen 22 targets from Kirk Cousins, so they're certainly getting a little bit of chemistry. Pitts should see a good game against the Bucks. They've had 3 tight ends beat them for 13 plus. That includes Kyle Pitts, who had 15.8 against them in week 5. So play Kyle Pitts. Dalton Kincaid, he could show up this week against Seattle. Cade Otton with all those targets missing out in Tampa. He
gets a boost.
And Cole Kmet against Washington.
Yeah. Speaking of Dalton Kincaid, last week I had him as a bust. He only had 3 catches, 52 yards, 8 fantasy points in PPR leagues. He played Tennessee, who are now number 2 in fewest fantasy points allowed to the tight end position. Well, guess who gets him this week? Sam Laporta, who hasn't looked good all this year. I mean, he had 1 catch for 52 yards and a touchdown against the Cowboys. That's about all he's done all year. I had Kincaid as a bust last week. I'm putting Sam Laporta in the same category. Now, Sam Laporta does possibly get a boost to his target share because Jameson Williams is suspended for 2 games. However, Jared Goff's not throwing the ball a lot. They're doing a lot of the ground game and running the ball in this Lions offense with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, I think that continues here. Even though the Titans defense has been pretty stout against the run, I think that Jahmyr Gibbs, the offensive line of the Lions, is just so good. I think they lean on Gibbs and Montgomery here and then get the ball to Amon-Ra. Khalif Raymond stepped up. Like, it's just a tough situation. This is like crazy because Sam Laporta was going as the top tight end over Travis Kelce, and he has not turned out to be that top tight end this year. I could see him busting this week, even though I know you don't want to really get away from him. I'm actually sitting him in favor of Evan Ingram this week. Tanner, do you have any tight end busts or thoughts on Sam Laporta?
I certainly have thoughts on Sammy, but I'm gonna let him slide on this one. I think it's for the betterment of this podcast. In regards to Hunter Henry, just be careful chasing the points. Jets defense only allowed one tight end to score over 7.1 points. Henry played him earlier this year. He had 2.9. Just be cautious. But I wanted to talk about Pat Freiermuth. Who gives a fuck, Muth? He's been inconsistent. He was a startable asset last couple of weeks. Numbers haven't been good. He gets the Giants, who have allowed only 35.1 receiving yards and the 7th fewest fantasy points per game to tight ends. I expect Muth to have a bad game in week 8. Only one tight ends beat them for over 10.2 points this year. Sit Pat if you can.
He's just not getting volume. 3 targets last week from Russell Wilson. Until Russell Wilson starts targeting him more, I think we avoid him. So I think that's a good call. And that's going to do it for the tight ends. Let's go into defenses and kickers.
Hold on.
Oh.
I know Dalton Schultz was mentioned earlier, but he hasn't done anything with Nico Collins out. Like, I'm tired of putting him in there and being disappointed. This week against the Colts, their defense allowed the 2nd most points per game to tight ends, but the problem is Schultz hasn't done shit this year, and he scored no more than 7.4 points in any game. The Texans passing game, like, he's just not getting the ball.
Tank Dell, Diggs,
and Joe Mixon. Yeah. Beware of Isaiah Likely as well. I think it's the Mark Andrews show, but yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I mentioned it earlier. Only 4 targets in his last 6 games. 4 targets or less in 6 straight games for Isaiah Likely. Not good. Definitely not good.
But yeah, let's get into defenses.
Dalton Schultz, like you were saying, like, he's like a boom bust tight end, and I don't think I want that as a guy that I'm starting. But yeah, let's move into defenses. A start at the defensive position is pretty easy, honestly. They've only allowed 18 points or less in 4 straight games. They played Atlanta, LA Chargers, New Orleans, and San Francisco. It's Kansas City. And they get Las Vegas, who Minshew had 4 turnovers last week versus the Rams. And the Rams, if y'all missed it last week, they were my sleeper defense last week. And they scored a touchdown, had about 17 fantasy points, depending on whatever format you play. But the Rams defense killed the Vegas Raiders last week. And I think the Chiefs defense does the same. Fire up the Chiefs and start them. I doubt they're out there, but if they are, go get them and fire them up. Tanner, who do you have as a start at the defense position?
So I've got the Broncos at number 1 on the week. I don't know that, that's an obvious start, but they have an even better matchup now that Bryce Young's going to be in the game.
Yeah.
The Lions, I think. This week. The Lions against the Titans. We talked about the Titans offense a little bit earlier. Defensives have averaged the most fantasy points against the Titans. Titans have committed 12 turnaways and allowed 19 sacks.
Thank you, Will Levis.
Yeah, between all their quarterbacks. So yeah, start the Lions. I also think it's worth mentioning the Jets against the Patriots. Like I mentioned, sitting Drake May and in regards to chasing the points with Hunter Henry. Ravens defense against the Browns. ESPN 30 for 30. Jameis Winston's back. Steelers defense against Daniel Jones.
No, that's cash money right there. I also like the Bears against the Commanders. If there's no
Yep.
Jaden Daniels, upgrade them even more if there's no Jaden Daniels.
Mhm.
But there's something to caution about the Bears defense. Their run defense is what you need to worry about, not their pass defense. Their pass defense is pretty good, but I expect a heavy dosage of Brian Robinson Jr. in the Commanders game plan. So I would still start the Bears defense, but be cautious and be even more cautious if Jaden Daniels somehow is able to go. But I don't think Jaden Daniels is able to go in this one, which is really unfortunate. Everyone wanted to see the two rookie quarterbacks go head to head, but I think it's just for the betterment of the Washington Commanders' future for him to sit out. Another defense I don't like this week is the Saints. Chargers have looked good, and I expect Dobbins to get back on track this week. We saw Javonte Williams explode against the Saints run defense. I think J.K. Dobbins gets back on track and does well against the Saints defense, and their offense just can't help them out, can't get them off the field. They have Spencer Rattler at quarterback. Their weapons are all banged up. Tanner, who do you have as a sit or defenses to avoid this week for everyone out there?
Eagles, they just haven't played anybody this year.
Yep.
I think Cincinnati's offense has only turned the ball over 6 times this year.
That's correct. Yep, that's right. They don't turn it over often.
And they'll probably score a lot of points against the Eagles. We know how bad they are against receivers. So
I think this game's going to be a shootout. So definitely avoid the Eagles.
I wouldn't
just back and forth.
Yeah, I agree with that. I wouldn't play the Bills against the Hawks. I'd watch out for the Hawks against the Bills as well. Both of those defenses, I'd avoid that game.
That game could be a shootout as well.
Commanders versus the Bears. They've been better at lately, but they get Caleb Williams this week coming off a bye. Bears offense has been solid in recent weeks. I'd rather not play Washington.
Yeah, definitely try and avoid them. I'm expecting a big week from Caleb and the Bears offense coming off a bye. There's other defenses. If these defenses are available, like Bears, Lions, Packers, Jets may have been dropped because the Jets have allowed a lot of points over the last couple weeks, and I don't know, they may be out there. Someone may have gotten pissed off and dropped them. Definitely go get them. They're getting Hassan Reddick back. They're probably getting DJ Reed back. They won't be with their two of their safeties. That I don't think either safety is practiced at all yet. I think they've both been DMP, so that's tough. But I still trust them in this one. I think the Jets are a good play. But should we go into kickers now, Tanner?
Yep, let's get it.
All right, final position is the kickers. Start at the kicker position is Chase McLaughlin. Even though this offense lost 2 of their top weapons in Chris Godwin and Mike Evans last week, I still think they're able to move the ball against this Atlanta defense, who have allowed the most points to kickers in the entire NFL. And I know Baker's going to be without his top weapons, but they have a good run game. Bucky Irving could be out, but they still have Sean Tucker as the third string running back. He can serve as the backup. Rachaad White looked good last week. I think Jalen McMillan gets going. Cade Otton gets going. Not to mention Sterling Shepard has that rap with Baker Mayfield from their OU days. So I think firing up Chase McLaughlin, I think Atlanta can allow them a lot of yards, but then they may be able to stop them in the red zone, which forces more field goals, which helps Chase McLaughlin's fantasy points go up and up and up. Tanner, who do you like at the kicker position this week?
I like Will Lutz. He's kicker 5 after 7 games. He should have a good game against the Panthers. They've allowed 4 kickers to score at least 12 points this season. I like Will Reichard against the. Oh, he already played by the time this drops.
I think he did pretty decent. He had 2 field goals and 2 extra points. I'm not sure on the distance.
Cameron Dicker, he was hot last week. He could have a good game
5
against
field
the
goals.
Saints.
5 field goals. He was my sleeper. 5 field goals. One of them was 59-yarder. So
Yeah.
think you can fire him up with
Jake
confidence.
Bates versus the Titans. I kind of like that matchup for him.
Yeah, great matchup.
And that's all I've got.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to choose all these kickers because it's like if you have Brandon Aubrey, you're obviously starting him. If you have
Right.
some of these top guys,
Butker, Tucker,
you're starting him.
McLaughlin.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like no doubt about it. They're in your lineup.
Fairbairn.
Yeah, Fairbairn's a
Seibert.
lock.
Siebert.
Yeah, Siebert, he may struggle, but that really depends on Jane Daniels' situation.
McLaughlin may struggle too then, right? But I don't know.
It's Baker still Baker. Baker's still
Baker. McLaughlin, he scored 9 or more in 3 of his last 4, so he should be fine.
The Falcons defense is worse than the Bears defense in my opinion.
And he had 16 against Atlanta last time. He'll be fine.
Yeah. I think points will be scored for him. Blake Grupe is a guy I kind of want to avoid. The Saints offense hasn't looked good. Chargers have allowed less than 8 fantasy points to every kicker they faced, except for one kicker. And then another kicker I want to avoid is, scrolling down to get him, Cairo Santos. Washington allows single-digit fantasy points to kickers, and Santos hasn't looked good in the 4 weeks prior. Even though they had a bye last week, he still didn't look good before the bye, and I think that may have something to do with the Bears just scoring more touchdowns. Also, he's missing field goals, so if you're somehow thinking about picking him up, definitely don't pick him up. I think there's better guys out there over the guys we named, and you can probably get a better kicker. If you have any kicker questions, feel free to shoot them on Twitter. I'll be happy to answer them. But that's going to do it for me at the kicker position. Tanner, you have anything else at the kicker position?
Yeah, Tyler Ass against the Seahawks. Jake Smelliot against the Bengals. Carlson against the Chiefs. I don't like any of those guys. Myers, I think he was a guy to play last week. He put up 12 points, but yeah, this week against the Bills isn't a good one. I don't think anyone has beaten the Bills for more than 8 points at the kicker position, and the position has averaged fewer than 7 points per game against them overall. So, Blake Grupe, did you talk about him?
Yeah, just their offense looks like shit.
And Shankos, I think I heard you cover Shankos.
Santos. Yep, Shankos. He has been shanking.
Yep. So, yeah, that's it.
All right. Well, that is the quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, defenses, and kickers. If you joined us live on Twitter or YouTube, thank you for tuning in live. This episode, if you missed some of it, joined in late, joined in at the beginning and left and came back. The full episode will be posted anywhere you listen to podcasts tomorrow. It also will be posted on YouTube once the recording is done, and you can view it on there. But yeah, that's going to do it. The full weekly matchup analysis for week 8 is going to be coming out on Saturday, as always, with every single game, all the start, sits, sleepers, and busts for every single game. And once you see that pop out, give it a retweet. We really appreciate that. Helps grow the audience. And if you have any questions, comment on that post, and I'll be happy to answer them. Tanner, you have anything else to add for the listeners before we peace out of here?
Yeah, just check out the Twitter for any last minute questions you may have. We try to go live and answer all the questions within an hour before the noon games or, morning games kick off wherever you're located, 1:00 games. But yeah, thanks for listening as always, and appreciate you having me on, Brady.
Hell yeah. Always a pleasure. One of the greatest fantasy minds in the game.
My guy.
We will try. I think let's try and go live in the morning on Sunday if we can. And if not, we'll be answering them live on Twitter. But if we are live, you'll see us on Twitter. It'll be just like this. So thank you guys for listening to the Week 8 preview, start, sits, sleepers, and busts. Have a great weekend and get the dub in your fantasy matchups. Thank you guys for listening and have a good one. See you. Bada bing, bada boom.
I should have